Hey guys, who wants to be happier? Dumb question, right? I mentioned when I started this whole kind of offshoot brand, Tribal 4.6, that I wanted to cover topics more than just health science and nutrition. That's a huge part of my career. I started in my 20s and went through a lot of physical medicine, nutrition, graduate work, but then I started doing some work in the social science writing area, now working on a second master's degree in social anthropology, social psychology, that kind of thing. So I thought if I could incorporate everything that I want my career to be, it really is kind of an imprint on what I want my life to be, which is, of course, we have our physical health that plays a huge part in our well-being, but then we have our social health, our relational health, and then I think probably the third leg on that stool would be career, because that's our identity, it's what we do. So I said I'm going to go through topics like that periodically and kind of wax and wane between different nuances of each. And I just am finishing one of the best memoir books I've ever read. And it's by a guy, James Boswell, who lived in England. Actually moved from Scotland to England when he was 22. His father, who was an attorney, wanted him to be a lawyer as well, but Boswell said, I don't want to do that. So as a lot of young people did in those days, he kind of went off to do things abroad and maybe find himself. And he decided at one point that the best way to really understand who he was to journal. So he ended up just starting this diary that lasts about a year, and it was almost lost in history. It's a really funny, great, almost mystery how this even came to be. But this young guy at 22 years old, sent to London on a very modest allowance, as he said, had to kind of test the waters between how he's going to impress his father with his own adult decisions. And he's bustling between the higher and lower echelons of society. And he's writing it all down in this daily journal with the greatest raw honesty of what he's feeling, his internal musings about life and his own career ambitions and relationships. There's some hilarious sex stories and so forth in here. But along the way, one of the things I really loved, well, two things. Number one, he keeps discussing his own emotions. He keeps telling you on days when he's happy, when he's melancholy and so forth. And it's all part of this kind of journaling, but also in a journalistic sense, telling you what's happening in society. He ends up brushing shoulders with some incredible people. Some of the Enlightenment era writers and philosophers and scientists are in here where he's with them. And as this young kid who doesn't even know really who he's talking to, these people became historical figures. He's got his own internal or personal interactions with them, and it's really, really cool. So this is a huge topic, guys. When we come into something like a broad topic, happiness, what do we mean by that? I think a lot of us could stand on one of two principles to begin with. We hear a lot of people say, well, happiness is internal. Nothing will make you happy, whether it's money, this or that. You have to be happy with yourself on the inside. And that's a legitimate argument in philosophy. You could even go back to Enlightenment era philosophers and talk about that. There were different sides from Pascal and Descartes and Hume and Hobbes and Locke and people like that. They were having those arguments even back then. And then somebody else might say, well, there is an external component. What happens to me, what is happening to me does affect my happiness. And maybe I can learn to control that and react differently. But of course that's going to play a part. So again, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to just pick hard, fast, foundational stances and just say this is dogma. It really is something that we should take all in and just kind of sort it out as we go. So I want to talk to you a little bit about something that Corey Probst, our wellness director, Dr. Corey Probst, taught me years and years and years ago, and it became the premise of her doctoral dissertation, and now it's a huge part of my social science research and writing, and that is simply self-determination theory. Many ways you can categorize mental health and motives in life and that kind of thing, all the way from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but self-determination theory basically says our most basic psychological needs, if we're going to analyze our happiness, our motives, our intent, are going to be that, one, human beings want autonomy. We want to make our own decisions, be our own boss kind of thing. Two is competence. This is the whole we got to have a purpose thing. And then three is connection, relatedness, and so forth. So one of the things I love about this book is it's a period piece, historical literature, but it's written in such a lively, engaging way that you're getting the best of those cross-cultural references, and yet it's so darn impacting on how we still are to this day. So to relate this across 300 years is just phenomenal. So I wanted to share with you just a couple things about how Boswell was dealing with those same things, about happiness and in his search for fulfillment in those psychological needs. So listen to this. I think myself as good as anybody, and I act entirely on my own principles. Formerly, I was directed by others. I took every man's advice that I regarded. I was fond to have it. I asked it. I told all my stories freely. But now, I keep my own counsel. I follow the dictates of my own good sense, that which I can be no better monitor, and I proceed consistently. So there's autonomy. Here's this young guy, 22 years old, and he's saying, man, I'm my own man now. I'm away from my dad and so forth. And he takes great pleasure in that. He goes through passage after passage in his journal talking about how good he feels. It's really funny to hear his inner ego speaking loud and clear. But then again, that's autonomy. I want you to keep in mind these three things: autonomy, competence, and connection. Here's another one. I then called for Lady Maribel. She seemed to me like a good deal. I was lively, or she seemed to like me a good deal. I was lively, and I looked like the game. As it was my first visit, I was very quiet. However, it was agreed that I should visit her often. This elated me, as it afforded me a fine, snug, and agreeable prospect of gallantry. Yet I could not think of being unfaithful to Louisa. But then I thought Louisa was only in the meantime till I got into genteel life, and that a woman of fashion was the only proper object for such a man as me. At last a delicate honor prevailed, and I resolved for some time to keep alive my affection for Louisa. So you can see him hedging his bets here. He's playing this game. First of all, he likes this one woman, but then he says, but this one is, as I become more part of that upper crust of society, this is the kind of woman I would love to see myself with. And you can see how great it made him feel that he was even noticed. So again, that part of competence and connection, which was huge to this guy, of just, pretty strong ego. He wanted those ego needs met to fulfill that purpose. So then we get into a stretch where he's just kind of drifting through, and I want to just read some of these quick phrases. Flattened my spirits. I got up in miserable spirits. I now thought that human happiness was quite visionary, and I was weary of life. I could form no idea of happiness. However, of my dullness. I'm just skipping around some of these phrases. My distress. I was very unhappy. I was not happy. He said that too few, if any, people were happy. So you can see he's just kind of obsessed with his own happiness. Yet I still remained very low-spirited. All this afternoon I felt myself still more melancholy. And he goes through this entire phase where he's just not finding anything to latch onto. And so he really needed something external, or maybe he needed to learn to react differently and kind of manage his own emotions. But I just thought that was great to see how he vacillated back and forth through this year in different things. But anyway, a couple more things I wanted to read, and then I'll wrap this up. One of the things he said about happiness, which was ironic, because now he's talking about somebody else, Macpherson must be miserable because he is absolutely void of curiosity. Boswell considers himself quite intellectual, and he ended up writing some phenomenal works later in life. He was intellectual, but one of the things I noticed he pointed out that he wasn't quite connecting dots on in his own life is that somebody who lacked that curiosity, that wasn't reaching for something more, something bigger, something better, he said that must be a pretty dull life. And he was quite a guy about the town. You don't go through one of his daily entries without saying he had breakfast with this person, or he dined with this person, or he was asked to dinner with this person. At this time in society, at least through the eyes of Boswell, it didn't seem like anybody did anything alone. They were always getting together, at least just to hang out and have a meal. So another big part of connection, in that part where he was not feeling it, he was isolated. He had a medical issue, which I'll leave you to read if you want to, and he was quite isolated for a time. But here's another thing that's really interesting. I hope I marked this part. I hope I don't miss that with his father. So one of the things that he said, I'll just quote this from memory. At one point, when he was feeling down, he discussed receiving a letter from his father, and the interesting thing was he said, he got this great letter from his dad, and his dad said, by the way, you can do anything you want. I'm not hung up on you being an attorney anymore. You can go do what you want. And he said that made him feel fantastic because he wanted to please his father. He said, my dad is an honorable person, worthy of honor. And then he went on to say how he was going to achieve all of these things, and he wanted to make society proud. He wanted to make his mark. He wanted to make his father proud. So I thought that was great because I've written a parenting memoir as well. And just seeing that connection, and yet the freeing of his dad's expectations when he felt like there was no longer any pressure, then he felt like he could truly be his own person, autonomy, and still have the appreciation of his father. But at one point, he was having a conversation with Samuel Johnson, who became known as one of the greatest minds of all of English literature in the Enlightenment era. And this is what Johnson said. Again, this is a beast of a guy with tons of books and essays. He told Boswell about happiness. This is what's important. That a man, by giving as much application, although perhaps he might never ride 3 horses at a time or dance upon a wire, yet he might be equally expert in whatever profession he chooses to pursue. So in other words, whatever you do with zeal. Whatever your profession, whatever your goals in life, if you are 100% zeroed in on it, you feel intentional and purposeful, again, there's autonomy and competence, then happiness will follow. I thought that was a great line. But here's what I want to close with. This is what Boswell said. Such is the views that Mr. Johnson has of the most trivial matters. I never am with this great man without feeling myself bettered and rendered happier. And I would say the same thing as just one final note. When we're around people who are positive and engaging and they have just a great temperament about life, they want to see other people do well. As Johnson was saying, I don't care what part of society you're in, I think you're going to be happier if no matter what you do, you love it. So give your full attention to it. But then look at the response of Boswell. That made him feel even better and more inspired. So this is something we're going to keep going with, guys. I apologize, this video is a little bit longer than I intended, but this is something that we're going to break apart into small pieces, but keep this in mind, that your motives, you can always, and that's why I've highlighted this entire book, because of such an interesting character. I don't care who you are, when you lived, all of your motives, when laid bare, can be categorized in your pursuit of autonomy, connection with other people, and competence. And so if you ever feel like you're just not gelling with your current environment, your life at that time, the context of where you are, ask yourself those 3 questions. In those 3 areas, in my relationships, which are connection, in how I feel about the prospect of my future and what I'm doing in life and so forth, my autonomy, or in competence, do I feel like I'm really achieving something worthwhile? Is my life on track in some area that gives me excitement? You're gonna probably find some really important answers right there. So I hope that helps, guys. Some big areas of life that we can all help each other with, and I love being able to share these things, and love your comments. So let me know what you think, and that'll help me decide where to go with this next. Thanks, guys.